All right, welcome everyone. We're diving deep today into China's challenge to the West. Specifically, we're going to be looking at their rapid technological advancements, especially in AI.
Exciting stuff.
We've got a transcribed speech here that really gets into the nitty-gritty, and some of the insights are just fascinating.
Yeah, you'll find it's a pretty provocative analysis.
So the big question we're tackling, can China break free from that traditional global division of labor? And what does that mean for, well, everyone else?
That's the question, isn't it?
Ah,
And you'll find we're not just talking about, economic competition. This could be a power shift on a global scale. Think about it. For decades, the world has operated under a certain structure, a division of labor. Right?
okay, so the classic setup.
Right. Wealthy nations produce those high-value goods,
Right.
while developing countries, they export raw materials.
All right.
Dependency theory, it argues that this system keeps those developing countries reliant on the core nations,
Yeah,
for advanced tech, and ultimately a bigger piece of the profit pie.
makes sense. So we've got this established system, but China's making moves that are kind of shaking things up, right?
Wait time. China's development across sectors like AI, batteries, renewable energy, even electric vehicles, it's incredibly fast. And this directly challenges the old order. They're not just sending out raw materials anymore, they're creating high-value products.
Becoming a tech powerhouse.
Exactly.
And this source material really highlights China's AI progress. As a prime example, we know U.S. big tech is pumping billions into AI. It's driving stock market growth. I mean, look at the Magnificent Seven, the S&P 500.
Right.
But then you've got this Chinese company, DeepSeek. They developed a powerful AI model, R1, for a fraction of the cost, like just $6 million.
And they made it open source.
Right, open source.
That open source aspect is crucial.
Why?
It changes the playing field for developing nations.
Okay.
Now they can access and develop AI without depending on those massive Western corporations. Remember when Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, actually advised India against developing their own AI because of the cost?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, DeepSeek's model basically debunks that argument.
It's almost like a David versus Goliath.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this points to a larger issue, the Silicon Valley business model. It often hinges on creating a monopoly, then charging what's called monopoly rent.
Okay, explain that.
So companies like Uber and Meta, they operate at a loss until they dominate the market, then they can dictate prices.
Right.
Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, he wrote that article, Competition is for Losers, arguing that monopolies are the key to success in Silicon Valley. But DeepSeek, their open source model, it disrupts that whole strategy.
Yeah. No wonder The Guardian called DeepSeek the biggest threat to Silicon Valley's hegemony.
Right.
Which brings us to the U.S. response, that things are getting a little tense, right?
Yeah, definitely. The source material details how the U.S. has been actively trying to curb China's tech growth.
Well, we saw it first with Trump's tariffs, right?
Mm.
And sanctions on companies like Huawei. Then Biden expanded those, targeting new industries, electric vehicles, solar panels, batteries.
The three new industries.
Right, the three new industries, plus semiconductor.
The chip war.
The chip war, yeah.
And it's interesting how Chinese tech is often framed as a national security threat.
Right, whether it's TikTok or that social media platform Xiaohongshu, also known as Red or now DeepSeek.
It's a convenient way to justify protecting U.S. monopolies. Remember Trump inviting all those big tech CEOs to his inauguration?
Yeah.
Shows how closely tied those interests are.
Yeah. So it's not just economic competition, it's about control.
Yeah.
The U.S. wants to stay on top of the global tech hierarchy, you could say?
You could say that. To understand how China got here, you need to look at their industrial rise. They've used digital technologies, the internet, to industrialize at an incredible pace.
Yeah.
This wasn't by chance. It was a deliberate state-led campaign, using industrial policy, joint ventures, state-owned enterprises, targeted investment.
So they weren't content with staying in that assigned role, huh? They had a different game plan.
Exactly. And this brings us to what some are calling a new Cold War. It's not just military anymore. It's a battle for technological and economic dominance. The U.S., despite deindustrialization, still relies heavily on intellectual property monopolies, on financialization for its power. China's rise, it threatens that whole foundation.
Two very contrasting visions for the future, huh?
Yeah.
The U.S. wanting a unipolar world, calling the shots, while China's growth is pushing us toward, well, a multipolar reality, which leads us to a figure who perfectly articulates this tension, Dario Amodei.
CEO of Anthropic.
Right, CEO of Anthropic, a major U.S. AI company backed by Google and Amazon.
Yeah.
Amadei wrote this article earlier this year that just lays bare the U.S. perspective. He's advocating for stronger export controls on China, specifically to prevent them from getting the chips needed for advanced AI.
Basically cutting them off at the knees.
Pretty much, yeah. What's remarkable is his explicit statement that U.S. export controls are the key to maintaining a unipolar world.
Where the U.S. and its allies hold a, quote, commanding and long-lasting lead.
He's not mincing words. Pretty stark admission of the U.S. desire for unipolarity.
Indeed. And it underlines the stakes of this technological competition. The U.S. is fighting to hold its position, but China's rise fundamentally challenges the existing world order.
So what does all this mean for the average person? What might this bipolar world that Amodei fears actually look like?
To understand that, we need to take a closer look at how China achieved this incredible economic transformation, what strategies they're using to challenge the established order. It all starts with their approach to industrialization, which has been, honestly, nothing short of remarkable.
All right, let's dive deeper into that then.
Let's start by examining China's approach to industrialization, which, as I said, has been nothing short of remarkable. They've managed to defy the traditional model of development.
All right, break it down for me. How'd they pull this off?
Well, one key factor is China's robust industrial policy. It goes beyond just letting the market run its course. It's about the government actively shaping industrial development. They've identified strategic sectors like, technology and manufacturing, and poured resources into supporting their growth.
So it's a more hands-on approach to economic development.
Precisely. And they've used a variety of tools to do this. Joint ventures, for instance, have been crucial. They've partnered with foreign companies to gain access to technology, to expertise, but they make sure a significant portion of the profits and the knowledge stays within China.
Smart. They're learning from the best while building up their own capabilities. What else?
Then there's the role of state-owned enterprises. These companies are partially or fully owned by the government, and they played a major role in driving China's industrialization, investing heavily in infrastructure, in research and development, in key industries, creating a solid foundation for growth.
So it's not just private companies competing. The government's a key player, shaping the economy's direction.
That's right. They've also been strategic in using state-owned banks to direct investment towards priority sectors. This system, it's called window guidance, where the government essentially sets targets for lending to certain industries.
So they can kind of channel resources where they see fit.
Exactly. Towards areas they see as crucial for future growth, like renewable energy and, of course, AI.
It sounds incredibly coordinated, deliberate, not just letting the market decide winners and losers, they're actively shaping the landscape.
And the results are clear. China's industrial development has been historically unprecedented in its speed and scale. They've gone from a largely agrarian economy to a global manufacturing powerhouse in just a few decades.
Remarkable story. It really challenges a lot of the conventional wisdom about economic development.
It certainly does, and it's important to remember that this rapid industrialization, it wasn't just about producing cheap goods for export. China deliberately moved up the value chain, shifting from labor-intensive manufacturing to more high-tech industries. They knew they couldn't stay at the bottom of the pyramid forever.
They were aiming for something bigger.
Absolutely. They wanted to become a global leader in innovation and technology, and that's exactly what they're doing now.
It's almost like they flipped the script on the West, huh? They were expected to be content with being the world's factory, but they had other plans.
They saw an opportunity to leverage their strengths, their large and increasingly skilled workforce, to climb the ladder of economic development. And they've done it with remarkable success.
So what does this mean for the existing global order? We've been talking about this unipolar versus bipolar world. What are the implications of China's rise for the balance of power?
That's the key question, isn't it? The world has been used to a U.S.-led order for, decades. But China's emergence as a, technological and economic powerhouse, it's shaking things up.
Feels like we're at a crossroads.
We are. And there are different schools of thought on how this will play out. Some argue that a bipolar world with two major power centers, it could lead to greater instability, conflict even. Others suggest it could foster a more balanced, a multipolar system, where power is more evenly distributed.
So a bipolar world could be a recipe for either conflict or cooperation.
That's the uncertainty we're facing. It all depends on how the U.S. and China choose to engage with each other.
Okay, so let's talk about that engagement. How has the U.S. been responding to China's rise? We already touched on the tariffs, the chip war, but is there like a larger strategy at play here?
There's definitely a growing sense of unease in Washington about China's growing influence.
That's putting it mildly.
From the U.S. perspective, China's rise is a direct challenge to its, global dominance. The U.S. has long benefited from a system where it sets the rules,
Hmm.
economically, politically, militarily. China's ascendance, it threatens to disrupt that.
It's like the classic story of an established power threatened by a rising one.
Exactly. We're seeing it play out in a number of ways. The trade war, the tech competition, the military buildup in the Pacific. These are all symptoms of a deeper strategic rivalry.
So, what are the potential scenarios here? I mean, are we headed for a full-blown confrontation, or is there a possibility for some kind of coexistence?
That's the big question, and there are no easy answers. Some analysts believe that a new Cold War is inevitable, with both sides digging in and preparing for a long-term struggle for dominance. Others argue that there's still room for cooperation, for, managed competition, where both sides recognize each other's interests and work together to avoid a catastrophic conflict.
So, it's not a foregone conclusion that we're headed for a showdown?
Not necessarily. There are still opportunities for dialogue, for diplomacy, but it requires both sides to be willing to compromise, to find common ground.
That sounds like a tall order, given the current climate.
It is. But the alternative, a spiraling conflict between two nuclear-armed superpowers, that's too dangerous to even contemplate.
I think we can all agree on that. So, where do we go from here? What are the key factors to watch as this U.S.-China rivalry unfolds?
That's a great question. And it's one that, analysts and policymakers around the world are grappling with. There are a number of key areas to keep an eye on, and I think understanding these areas can help us make sense of this complex and rapidly evolving landscape.
Okay, let's break it down. What are the key areas we should be paying attention to?
First and foremost, we need to watch how the technological competition evolves. This is a critical battleground, as both the U.S. and China see technological dominance as essential for economic and military power in the 21st century.
So, we're talking about things like artificial intelligence,
Yeah,
quantum computing, biotechnology, all those cutting-edge fields.
exactly. These are the areas where the race is on and the stakes are incredibly high. Whoever gains the upper hand in these technologies will have a significant advantage in shaping the future.
It sounds like we're entering a new era of technological competition, one that could have far-reaching consequences.
We are. And this competition isn't just happening in the lab, it's playing out in the global marketplace, in investment decisions, in government policies.
So it's not just about who invents the next big thing, it's about who can commercialize it, scale it up, and integrate it into their economy, their military.
Precisely. And that's where things get really interesting, because it's not just about the U.S. and China anymore.
Okay, so who else is in the game?
Well, we're seeing other countries and regions emerging as potential players in this technological race. The European Union, for example, is investing heavily in research and development. They have the potential to become a major force in areas like artificial intelligence, renewable energy.
So it's not just a bipolar world after all. There are other players who could tip the balance.
That's right. And then you have countries like India, which has a rapidly growing tech sector and a vast pool of skilled engineers. They can become a major player in the global technology landscape.
So it's a much more multipolar world than we might have imagined just a few years ago.
It is. And that makes things even more complex and unpredictable.
I'm starting to see why this is such a challenging issue to wrap our heads around. It's not just about two superpowers vying for dominance. It's a much more dynamic and fluid landscape.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating. We're witnessing a historic shift in the global balance of power, and it's still unclear how it will all play out.
Well, one thing's for sure, it's going to be a wild ride. But we've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
I think it's important to emphasize that this rivalry between the U.S. and China, it isn't just about economics or technology. It's also about values, ideologies.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What are the fundamental differences in values that are at play here?
Well, on the one hand, you have the U.S., which champions liberal democracy, free markets, individual rights.
Right.
On the other hand, you have China, which promotes a more authoritarian model with a strong emphasis on state control, on social harmony, national unity.
So it's a clash of systems, a battle between two very different visions for how society should be organized.
Exactly. And this ideological dimension, it adds another layer of complexity to the relationship, makes it harder to find common ground, and increases the risk of misunderstanding, mistrust.
So we're not just talking about who has the best technology, the biggest economy. We're talking about fundamental differences in how we view the world.
That's right. And that makes this rivalry even more challenging and potentially more dangerous.
Okay, that's definitely something to keep in mind as we try to make sense of this unfolding drama.
Uh-huh.
But I think we've reached a good stopping point for today.
I agree. We covered a lot of ground, explored some really important ideas.
We certainly have, and I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so.
All right, well, as always, it's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
The pleasure is all mine.
And to you out there, thanks for joining us on this intellectual adventure.
Until next time.
See you then.
You'll find that China's economic transformation, it's been nothing short of remarkable. They've managed to, defy that traditional model of development. It's really thanks to a unique blend of, well, state intervention and market forces.
So they haven't just followed the usual playbook.
Exactly. Their approach has been much more deliberate, strategic. Take their robust industrial policy, for example. It's not just about letting the market run its course, It's about the government actively shaping, guiding industrial development. They've identified those strategic sectors like technology, manufacturing, and just poured resources into supporting their growth.
So it's like a more hands-on approach to economic development, kind of like a gardener carefully cultivating specific plants.
That's a great analogy. They're not just scattering seeds and hoping for the best. They're carefully nurturing the industries they believe will be crucial for their future. And they've used a variety of tools to do this. Joint ventures, for instance, have been crucial. They've partnered with foreign companies, right, to gain access to technology, to expertise. But they also make sure that a significant portion of the profits and the knowledge stays within China.
That's a clever strategy, learning from the best while also building up their own capabilities. It's like they're getting a master class in advanced technology.
Precisely. And then there's the role of, well, state-owned enterprises. These companies are partially or fully owned by the government, and they've played a major role in driving China's industrialization. They've invested heavily in infrastructure, in research and development, in key industries, helping to create that solid foundation for economic growth.
So it's not just private companies competing in the market. The government is a key player here, shaping the direction of the economy, almost like an architect, designing a blueprint for growth.
Exactly. And they've also been very strategic in using state-owned banks to direct investment towards priority sectors.
Oh, okay.
It's a system known as window guidance, where the government essentially sets targets for lending to certain industries. This has allowed them to channel resources towards, areas that they see as crucial for future growth, like renewable energy and, of course, AI.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like they're placing strategic bets on the industries they believe will, define the future. But how exactly does this window guidance work? It sounds kind of mysterious.
Well, imagine the government saying to the banks, we want you to prioritize lending to companies in, let's say, the renewable energy sector.
Okay.
The banks then make it easier for those companies to get loans, often at, favorable interest rates. It's a way for the government to steer investment without directly controlling the banks or the companies.
So subtle, but powerful. And it sounds like it's been pretty effective, judging by China's growth. But some might argue that this level of government intervention, could stifle innovation, could stifle competition. What do you think about that?
It's a valid concern. And there are definitely, debates about the optimal balance between state intervention and market forces. But in China's case, it seems to have worked pretty well. I mean, their economy has grown at an unprecedented rate, and they've become a major player in many high-tech industries.
It seems like they've managed to strike a balance, at least for now. But you mentioned earlier that this rapid industrialization wasn't just about producing, cheap goods for export. Can you elaborate on that?
You're right. China was very deliberate in moving up the value chain, shifting from, labor-intensive manufacturing to more high-tech industries. They knew they couldn't stay at the bottom of the pyramid forever, simply churning out, low-cost products. They wanted a bigger piece of the pie, and that meant moving into higher-value sectors.
So they had their sights set on something bigger, a more prominent role on the global stage, you could say. Did they have, specific industries in mind?
Absolutely. They identified key sectors like electronics, telecommunications, and, of course, artificial intelligence. Where they saw the potential for, significant growth and global leadership, they invested heavily in research and development, attracted foreign talent, created policies to support, the development of these industries.
It sounds like a well-calculated strategy, and it seems to be paying off. I mean, China is now a major player in many of these high-tech sectors. But how did they manage to achieve this so quickly? I mean, it takes, time and expertise to build up these advanced industries.
They were incredibly strategic and resourceful. They leveraged their strengths, particularly their vast workforce and their growing technological capabilities. They also weren't afraid to learn from others, acquiring technology and expertise through joint ventures and partnerships.
So it's a combination of factors, but it also sounds like there is a strong determination to succeed, almost a national ambition to become a technological powerhouse.
I think you're right. There was a sense that China needed to catch up with the West and then surpass it. And this ambition was fueled by, a combination of national pride, economic necessity, and a belief in their own potential.
That's fascinating. It's almost like a story of a nation, coming into its own, realizing its power and potential on the world stage. But this rise hasn't gone unnoticed, right? We've talked about the U.S. response and how it's creating this tension, this sense of a new Cold War brewing.
Exactly. China's success has, it's challenged the established order, and the U.S., as the incumbent superpower, is grappling with how to respond. Some see this as, a zero-sum game where one country's gain is inevitably the other's loss.
So it's like a tug of war for global
In a
dominance.
way, yes, but it's a complex tug-of-war with multiple dimensions, including economic, technological, and ideological, and the outcome is, well, far from certain.
Okay, so let's delve into those dimensions a bit.
Yeah.
We've already talked a bit about, the economic rivalry, the trade wars, the battle for technological supremacy. But what about the ideological differences? How did those play into this dynamic?
That's a crucial aspect of this rivalry, and it often gets overlooked. The U.S. and China, they have fundamentally different political systems, different values. The U.S. champions liberal democracy, individual rights, free markets, while China promotes a more authoritarian model with an emphasis on state control, on social harmony, national unity.
So it's a clash of systems, a clash of worldviews. How does that impact the relationship between the two countries?
It creates a deep level of mistrust and misunderstanding. It makes it harder to find common ground and increases the risk of conflict.
It's like they're speaking different languages, even when they're using the same words.
That's a great way to put it. And this ideological divide, it extends beyond, government to government relations. It also influences how businesses operate, how technologies are developed, how people view the world.
So it's not just a political issue, it permeates every aspect of the relationship. It's almost like two different operating systems trying to run on the same hardware.
Exactly. And that creates a lot of friction, a lot of instability.
So given these profound differences, is there any hope for cooperation between the US and China? Can they find ways to coexist peacefully, productively?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers. Some experts believe that, a certain level of decoupling is inevitable, with each side seeking to reduce its reliance on the other, both economically and technologically. Others argue that complete decoupling is impossible and ultimately harmful, and that, both countries need to find ways to manage their differences to cooperate in areas of mutual interest.
So it's a balancing act, finding ways to compete without, triggering a catastrophic conflict. But how do you manage that balance when the stakes are so high and the mistrust runs so deep?
That's the challenge facing policymakers on both sides. It requires a combination of, strategic thinking, diplomatic finesse, and a willingness to compromise. But ultimately, the future of the relationship will depend on the choices that leaders in both countries make in the years to come.
It sounds like we're entering a period of great uncertainty, a pivotal moment in history. The decisions made now will have far-reaching consequences. But how can we as individuals make sense of this complex and evolving landscape? What should we be paying attention to as this rivalry unfolds?
There are a number of key indicators to watch for, signals that can give us clues about, the direction this relationship is heading.
Yeah.
For example, we should pay attention to the evolution of global alliances. Will we see, a hardening of blocs with countries aligning more closely with either the U.S. or China, or will we see a more fluid and fragmented landscape with countries hedging their bets, trying to maintain relationships with both sides?
So it's not just about the US and China, it's about how other countries choose to position themselves in this new global order.
Exactly. Those choices will have a significant impact on the balance of power. Another key indicator will be the level of economic interdependence between the U.S. and China. Will we see a decoupling of the two economies, with each side seeking to reduce its reliance on the other? Or will they find ways to, manage their economic relationship and avoid a complete break?
A complete decoupling would be incredibly disruptive to the global economy, wouldn't it? I mean, those supply chains are so intertwined.
It would be hugely disruptive, and that's why I think it's unlikely to happen, overnight. But we are seeing a gradual shift towards regionalization, with companies and countries diversifying their supply chains, reducing their exposure to any single market.
So it's a balancing act, trying to manage the risks while also maintaining the benefits of economic integration.
Precisely. It's about finding a sustainable path forward, one that recognizes both the opportunities and the challenges of this, new global landscape. But it's not just about economics. It's not just about alliances. We also need to pay attention to the military dimension. We're seeing a buildup of military forces in the Asia-Pacific region, with both the U.S. and China investing heavily in their navies, their air forces.
So the risk of conflict is very real.
It is, and that's why it's so important to find ways to manage this rivalry, responsibly. We need to avoid a situation where a minor incident or miscalculation could escalate into a major confrontation.
It sounds like a lot is riding on the ability of leaders in both countries to exercise restraint, to find ways to cooperate.
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high, and the consequences of failure are, well, unimaginable, but there are also opportunities for cooperation, areas where both countries can benefit from working together. Climate change, for example, is a global challenge that demands a coordinated response. And there are potential areas of collaboration in, science and technology, where both countries have much to gain from sharing knowledge and expertise.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There are glimmers of hope amidst the tension and rivalry.
There are. It's important to remember that even rivals can find common ground when it's in their mutual interest. And in a world facing so many, complex challenges, cooperation is not just desirable, it's essential.
That's a message I think we all need to hear. It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric of rivalry and conflict, but it's important to remember that there are other possibilities, other paths forward. But how do we as individuals make sense of all this? It's such a complex, multifaceted issue.
It is complex, but it's not impenetrable. One way to make sense of it is to focus on the underlying dynamics, the forces that are shaping this relationship. Think about the economic factors, the technological race, the ideological differences, the geopolitical considerations. Once you understand these, underlying forces, you can start to see how they interact and how they influence the decisions that leaders make.
It's like having a mental map, a framework for understanding this complex landscape. But it's also a dynamic map, constantly changing, evolving.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to keep learning, to be open to new information and perspectives. The world is changing rapidly, and the U.S.-China relationship is at the heart of that change. Understanding this relationship, it's not just about following the headlines. It's about understanding the forces that are shaping our future.
It sounds like we need to become students of history, economics, politics, technology, all at the same time. It's a daunting task.
It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding. The more you learn about this relationship, the more you realize how much is at stake and how important it is to find a path forward that leads to, peace, prosperity, and a sustainable future for all.
Well said. I think we've given our listener a lot to think about today. It's been
Yeah.
a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope it's helped to shed some light on this complex and crucial relationship.
I think it has. And I think it's also highlighted the importance of staying informed, staying engaged, and staying hopeful.
Absolutely. The challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. And the choices we make today, they'll shape the world we live in tomorrow.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
But there's still more to explore. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the technological competition between the U.S. and China, exploring the specific technologies that are at the heart of this rivalry and what the implications are for the future of global innovation.
It's a fascinating topic, and I'm looking forward to diving into it with you.
Me too. And to you listening, we'll see you in the next part of our deep dive. So we're back, and as you'll recall, we've been exploring this fascinating relationship between the U.S. and China, how it's reshaping, well, everything.
We've uncovered a lot, yeah. It's not just an economic competition, right? It's a clash of systems, a battle for tech dominance, a real struggle to define the future of global order.
And as we dive deeper into this tech competition, there's one area that just seems crucial: semiconductors. I mean, they're essential for everything.
Yeah.
Smartphones, AI, you name it.
Absolutely. Semiconductors, or chips as they're often called, they're the building blocks of, well, the digital age, right? They power everything, from the devices we use every day to the most sophisticated military hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability to design and manufacture these chips is becoming a key indicator of a nation's, well, technological prowess, their economic competitiveness.
So it's not just about having the latest gadgets, it's about having the ability to create the very foundation of those gadgets.
Exactly. Control over semiconductor technology. It's a strategic imperative, a matter of national security, and a focal point of this U.S.-China rivalry. Remember we talked about the chip war?
Right, the U.S. trying to restrict China's access to advanced chip-making tech.
Right. And that's because these chips are absolutely essential for AI development.
Because they need that processing power.
Exactly. Advanced AI models, the kind that are capable of, truly transformative tasks, they require enormous computational power. And that power, it comes from semiconductors. The more advanced the chip, the faster, the more efficiently it can process information. And that's crucial for, training and running these complex AI systems.
So these chips are the fuel for the AI engine. And whoever controls that fuel supply, they have a big advantage in the AI race.
Great analogy. And that's why the U.S. is so concerned about, China's progress in chip making. They see it as a direct threat to their technological leadership, their ability to maintain their economic and military edge.
It's like a high-stakes poker game, and the chips, well, they're literally the chips.
Exactly. And the stakes are getting higher and higher. The development of artificial intelligence is seen as a game changer, a technology with the potential to revolutionize everything: healthcare, transportation, warfare. And whoever controls that most advanced AI will have a significant advantage in shaping the future.
So this chip war, it's really about more than just semiconductors. It's about control of the technologies that will define, well, everything in the 21st century. It's about the future of global power.
That's the big picture, yeah. And it's a picture that's becoming increasingly complex, uncertain. You've got these two superpowers, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, vying for dominance in a rapidly evolving technological landscape. And the outcome, well, the outcome of this competition is far from clear.
It's a bit dizzying, to be honest, all these interconnected forces. The economic rivalries, the technological race, the ideological clashes, the geopolitical maneuvering. It's a lot.
It's a lot to process. But I think, it helps to remember that at its core, this rivalry is really about two nations, each with their own aspirations, their own anxieties, trying to navigate a world that's undergoing a profound transformation.
So it's not just about these abstract forces. It's about people, leaders making decisions that will have a real impact on, millions, billions of people around the world.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the motivations, the perspectives, the pressures that are shaping those decisions. It's about seeing the human dimension of this global drama.
It's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in, the abstract analysis. But ultimately, this is about real people, real lives, real choices.
It is. And I think that's something that often gets lost in the headlines, in the political rhetoric. We need to remember that behind the statistics, behind the strategies, there are human stories, human hopes, human fears. And those stories, they matter.
They do. They remind us this isn't just, a game of chess between superpowers. It's about the future of our world, the world we all share.
Precisely. And I think that's the key takeaway from all of this. This rivalry, this competition, this clash of systems, of ideologies, it's not just a spectacle for us to observe from a distance. It's something that will impact all of our lives in ways big and small.
So we need to pay attention, we need to stay informed, and we need to engage in this conversation, because the choices we make, both individually and collectively, will shape the world we live in, the world we leave for, future generations.
I couldn't agree more. It's a responsibility we all share.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, explored some complex ideas, hopefully provided you with some food for thought.
It's been a pleasure, diving deep as always.
The pleasure was all mine. And to you out there listening, thanks for joining us. We encourage you to, continue exploring these ideas, stay curious, stay engaged, and engage in thoughtful discussions about the future we're creating together. Until next time.